And Asians had two characteristics. Intelligence and dedication is what they thought leadership was about. How the next conclusion arises, I'm not sure what their methodology was, but Caucasians came up with three characteristics: masculinity, dynamism, tyranny. Now, Asians put out a couple good tyrants, so we know you know how to do it.
Do that.
But you think that's true, that there's a... You spoke to this a little bit, right, Jenny? That if I work hard, someone will notice. And if I should just be deferential, but you've really got to be a loudmouth, don't you?
Before we get to that, though, Michelle, I was just going to say, when Michelle said that, I said, now I understand the whole problem with women. If it's masculinity, we got a problem.
We're done.
Sorry.
No, you're right.
No, obviously. I think just when you say loudmouth, I hope that nobody really comes across that way. I really do feel that today's leader is very different than 10, 20, 30 years ago. I don't always think that the loudest will always win or get noticed. Yeah, you might get noticed, but I think sometimes it's actually a negative. I think that you really, whatever you say, have to obviously have substance, or just be comfortable too, as John said, about your surrounding, your networking, and all of that. I just think that, that, again, I think I obviously disagree with that finding, right? Because I can't believe that's how someone describes leaders today. I think that's very dated.
Probably not leaders, probably bosses is what I'm thinking.
I think boss or dictator is how I would view it. I don't know how all of you view that, but I certainly don't view that today.
Rob, any suggestions? Go ahead, Jen. You want to?
No. I just like to hear. I like to hear the Caucasian side.
You feel tyrannical, Rob?
I don't, but I don't want to send a survey out, I guess. But no, I think that both. First of all, again, what I'm seeing emerging in our company, particularly in what I'll call our aspiring and our emerging talent, are people that are very assertive and feel very comfortable. They're humble, but they're also people that do feel very able to ask for what they want and to go for it, and that's a great thing. And so I think that there's also some change there. I think that's important. But John, I think you're really onto something too. I do think it's deeper. And by the way, I don't think this is unique among Chinese or Asian Americans. I actually think it's for anyone that at the end of the day, people have a comfort zone in terms of how they choose people. It shouldn't be that way. It oughtn't be that way. It ought to be completely skill and merit based, but it's human nature to a certain extent. I'm not endorsing it. I'm just recognizing it as the way that it is. And so to the extent that no matter what group you come from, to the extent that you can make yourself more a part of the overall social fabric, more overall the government and the civic fabric, et cetera, the better off you are, because it's easier for people to get by whatever that bias or that stereotype is and look just at the skill and the merit. Again, I wish it weren't that way, but there's a certain element to that.
I think, one of the characteristics that I observe that is sort of under-discussed, that's a characteristic of leaders, especially today, is authenticity. I think people respond to authenticity. So if you go out and you try to be what you think a leader should sound like, look like, behave like, you're going to fail. And so this idea of sort of being comfortable in your own skin and feeling that you can be who you are and still be successful, I think becomes the key to being a successful leader. And so that's comfort. How do you get comfortable being who you are?
As somebody who is so good with brands, if we accept the premise that there's a brand out there that works against a group, what are the tenets of changing a brand? Any thoughts on that? Or
well, sort of the way to I always think you sort of have to surprise people into paying attention, because if you're completely consistent with what people think a brand should be, what you should be, then people go, oh yeah, right, that's that person. But if you do some things that are surprising, it's amazing the impact it has, because the reality so defies what the expectation is. So if the brand is that brand, sort of just coming forward and feeling comfortable enough to say, I want that job. I'd like to try something new. I'd like to go to another country. I'd like to be in another place. It's just sort of, then people will stop and pay attention and say, I don't think that person is who I thought that person was. And so now you can kind of make progress. So.
We got to be careful, though, because after you ask that, they said, no. And what are you going to do? I said, okay. I thought I was just changing my brand. No, I'm just kidding. Obviously, she's the expert. I'm not, though.
But you brought up something earlier, John, which I thought was funny. It was when Jenny was telling us a story about how she turned down the job the first time. And you said, well, you know what? Actually, I see that happen a lot. And then 10 years later, the person holds a grudge because they feel passed over. Right?
Right. I actually have seen a lot of these. The two, when I was an engineer, there are two characteristics of a lot of my colleagues who are Asians, and it's not only Chinese, Koreans and everybody else. And we usually are sat in the back of the room and we're looking at, shift meetings. We always have shift meetings and talk about findings. And then there's somebody who was obviously stating the wrong thing. And a lot of us know that, but none of us speak up. We were just listening to the, quote unquote, the person saying the wrong thing. And then when we walked up, everybody whispered to each other, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And so, I mean, that's not a good moment. But I also found that a lot of time in my workplace, my work experience, the Chinese will be asked or maybe just, have an opportunity and they turn it down. Again, it's a little bit about not willing to take the risk, afraid to fail, or could I really lead, whatever. But they actually, once you turn it down, you turn it down. I mean, that's it, right? But then they hold a grudge a number of years later about not being picked. So that there's something that be natural, authentic is really a good word. You just got to be who you are, and you want to focus on adding value, but you ought to focus on adding value to the big picture, not just adding value to yourself. You be recognized. And then, again, I just want to make sure that everybody understands. I think we all agree that it's a matter of progression. We're on a pretty good track. So although there's still gaps, but we're on a pretty good track. And I think I see the next generation Asian Americans or Chinese Americans be a lot more assertive and very result-oriented. I actually don't see a big crisis out here. The branding study may be a little, I guess I disagree.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Is this a difference between first generation and second generation and third generation? That, we see with I'm Hispanic, see it with Hispanics, right? But by the third generation, you can't get that kid to speak Spanish. It's horrendous. They only want to learn English, et cetera, et cetera. And there's just this acculturation, and then, I don't know, is it something that we just shouldn't worry about? It's just going to happen?
Yeah, I think, you look at here what Secretary Locke said today about his, experience, very telling. Dad and mom, grandfathers work a certain way. Dad and mom work 7/24. So my statement about involvement and giving back to society and all that, well, it's a little impractical. Okay, and then, Gary and brothers and sisters, look at when we have Secretary soon to be Ambassador Locke. So I like everybody focused on positive. There are a lot of opportunities there. Yes, there's skills that need to hone in. Their involvement, you need to expand your horizons. You just need to focus beyond just your family.
A couple of things I just wanted to say. One is that I think we're on the right track, but I'm not ready to go on cruise control. I think we've got to watch this and watch it carefully, particularly in terms of are people really emerging. And I think the other thing is, but I'm not a quota person, et cetera, but I think you need to watch it. And one thing we haven't talked about, but I'm a big believer in, is mentoring. Both formal mentoring that we do for talent, I'm sure, in all of our companies, but also informal mentoring, which I think is just as important. But, Shelly made a great point about authenticity. For part of this, and particularly for people, not just Asian Americans, but any leader that isn't necessarily, that is humble, is not all that comfortable being, marketing themselves, et cetera. It's about being seen and being understood. And if you have that mentor or that informal mentor, they can help see that in you. They can help, give you that little nudge that you need to assert yourself a little bit more, and I think to be successful. And so